Hello and good afternoon. Welcome everybody for joining us today. This is I believe it's our 10th webinar during lockdown. Again, we're all working from home at the moment, as you can tell from my background, and really looking forward to engaging with you all today. Anyone that hasn't been on one of these webinars before, we will be sharing all of the videos, the presentation, post-event. So no need to scribble down loads of notes unless you feel like you want to. But we've got a fair bit of information to go through with you today around endpoint assessment. I'm not doing this all by myself today. Those of you that don't know me, my name's Mark Armitage. I've been at the IMI for 5 years, head up membership products and services, and joined today by some of the managers from the department who are really taking the lead on endpoint assessment. So we've got Tony Lawson today. We've also got, there's Tony, we've also got Nishma Harris and Barry Williams. So these were likely to be names that are familiar with you all. I'll take you through the agenda on what we're going to cover. So, like always, full of acronyms, but hopefully we can understand what they mean. So introduction, as we're doing right now. Then we're going to have Nishma talk us through some of our SEPA registration updates. SEPA is our endpoint assessment booking system. Some changes that link to QLMS, which is where we register learners, or where you as centres register learners through some updates that we've just introduced, which automatically link some data together. There's also going to be a bit of an update on the booking process and how we currently accept EPA bookings where functional skills are involved. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, functional skills are currently a calculate solution in line with the extraordinary regulatory framework from Ofqual. We'll also take you through a review of notification around EPA bookings and some changes that we're going to be implementing to try and facilitate EPA more quickly. We're going to take you through some agreed adaptations that you may or may not be aware of. And if you're not aware, we've actually started just this week redoing face-to-face activities, EPA skills assessments. They started yesterday, but there's a big piece over the last couple of weeks we've been doing around risk assessment. So we're going to take you through some of that, take you through some success stories that we've been great to see during lockdown. And as it says at the bottom there, Q&A. So anybody that hasn't been on one of these before, at the bottom of your screen or somewhere on your screen should be a Q&A icon. If you click on there, you can submit a question. We will, where possible, try and answer all of those during the course of the session. Some may already be covered during the content, but we will have some time towards the end to talk about the questions that you've asked. If they don't all get answered today, we will follow up as required through the teams. So please, if you're not sure, ask, and we'll do our best to help you. This session in its total should run till about possibly 3 o'clock, but we will try our best to keep it on point. So for those of you that are not aware, a bit of current position of the IMI. So believe it or not, even though English apprenticeship frameworks can still be registered on for the rest of July, we've been involved in apprenticeship standards and the transition for the last 5 years in one way, shape or form. Gaining EPO, or what was assessment organisation back then, in 2016. We're currently approved for 18 apprenticeship standards as an endpoint assessment organisation, and our desire is to support all routes within the automotive sector, being as that's our key vision that we've been doing for 100 years now. We delivered our first EPAs back in 2018, seems like a lifetime ago, but it was only a couple of years ago, and we've currently got about 8,000 apprentices that have come through centres like yourselves to engage with us for EPA. We've already done more than 100 events and over 400 apprentices. And looking at the projections pre-lockdown, we're expecting to see about 1,500 apprentices this year. We're fully aware of the challenges that everybody's facing at the moment and realise that some of those numbers may change. But also what we're aware of is the ability for everybody to kind of logistically deliver during the current challenges. So we are working on a number of strong partnerships, making sure we've got sufficient volumes of assessors, and where required, also some facilities if you're finding a challenge with finding space in a workshop due to all of the backlog following your learners being impacted by COVID and then having to bring them in at a later point in the year. So if you've got any challenges like that, please get in touch, and I'm pretty certain that we'll have solutions in place for you. So we're going to move on now to some of the booking information, which Nishma is going to take you through. So I'll pass you on to Nishma. And as I said, if you've got any questions, please put them in at the bottom of the screen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. As Mark's mentioned, I will be giving you a brief overview of the latest updates with SEPA, which is our endpoint assessment booking system, followed by some flexibilities applied for functional skills and the calculated grades and how we accept them through EPA gateway process. So to start off with, just a brief overview on the updates for our EPA booking system. For those of you that are not yet engaged with EPA with us, SEPA is our EPA booking system. It allows providers like yourselves to complete prerequisite checklists, upload relevant evidence in order to pass apprentices through Gateway, and it's predominantly used by the IMI scheduling team to schedule in assessments. It automatically allocates assessors depending upon location. And it also records and manages individual and overall grades within the system. So over the last year or so, since we've been in partnership with Smart Apprentices and Smart EPA, we've been working closely with the developers with our IT team also, just to ensure that we can provide an effective and simple way of managing EPA for yourselves as well as us from an end-to-end process. So with this latest update, which actually went live on Monday, any new apprentices registered on an EPA package through Web Portal 2 will now automatically be registered in SEPA. So over the last 18 months or so, we've been working with the development team on adding additional mandatory fields into Web Portal, which you will have noticed if your team have been registering apprentices. With this now all in place, this does mean that live registrations on Web Portal 2 will now appear in SEPA. So on this slide here, I've just listed some benefits that this update will have for you as providers. So enabling apprentices to be readily available in SEPA will allow you to upload evidence prior to EPA Gateway at the beginning of the process rather than right at the end. You will also be able to update employer apprentice information through one system only. Prior to this, we allowed users to access SEPA to update apprentice and employer information, which wasn't feeding back through to Web Portal. However, now this development's now in place, all data will cross over from both systems, but you will only be able to update it in one system. So for those of you also that have been through the EPA process with us already, you will know previously we've had to go back and forth with communications to gather some mandated information that was required for apprenticeship registrations within our systems in order to get them into SEPA. Now this live update will remove that step so we can see them go into the system automatically without having to use that back and forth communication. Next slide. So what's changed? So I think I've touched upon some of these just previously. So I did mention that there's mandated fields that have been added to Web Portal 2. So these are mainly around the employer details. The reason for the employer details being mandatory is so we can process certification claims upon successful EPA. Also, as I mentioned, the apprentice and employer information will only need to be updated in Web Portal 2. So this means that any changes or amendments you need to make to apprentice employer information, the fields are amendable within Web Portal 2. By doing this, we've had to restrict some user account restrictions from SEPA. So like I said, you would only be able to update those in Web Portal 2. There are some fields that are not available to amend. So these will be your normal first name, surname and date of birth, just in line with our operations manual, section 4.2. And to reflect these changes, we've updated our SEPA guidance documents and our apprenticeship standard registration guidance documents, which are all available on Web Portal 2 and our websites. Within these slides, I have added some links so you can go back to refer to when needed. So what's next? So as I mentioned before, we have been working closely over the last year or so with the development team at SEPA, just to improve the services that we provide to you guys and make that endpoint assessment and booking process a bit more slicker. So there will be further updates that we will be releasing. So I've added a link also to this slide that will take you straight to the page to keep the most up-to-date information on our developments. So with this latest update, there are a few tasks that we still need to do. So if you've already had apprentices registered on an EPA package that haven't provided the mandated information that we require, we will be sending out further communications, and we will be required to work with yourselves just to gather that information so we can ensure the apprentices are registered into SEPA. Now, back in January, I think it was, we released a communication saying that all mandated fields were updated. So therefore, any registrations made in January this year onwards on an EPA package, we will already have that mandatory information in our systems. So we'll be working closely with our IT teams to try and get all those apprentices into SEPA ready for you to start the EPA booking process. So sorry, just before I move on to my next section, as Mark mentioned, if you do have any questions on the above updates or any SEPA related questions, please just pop them in the Q&A section, and we can try and get to them at the end if time allows. If not, we'll follow them up after. So my second update relates to the current COVID-19 situation we're all experiencing at the moment. So the Institute for Apprenticeships and ESFA have released some updates on flexibilities to help apprentices complete EPAs. Tony Lawson will be touching on the flexibilities, particularly for EPA assessments later on. However, I'm just going to briefly run through some key points from the latest flexibilities that relate to passing an apprentice through EPA gateway without functional skills upfront. So, in usual circumstances, as you will probably all be aware, functional skills is a requirement prior to the apprentice taking an EPA. However, not to disadvantage the apprentices, the IFA and ESFA have relaxed the rule around the requirement for this functional skills to be available as evidence at the EPA gateway point. Although they've relaxed this rule, they have made it clear that it only applies to certain apprentices that meet the criteria which I've listed on this slide here. So they must have to have planned to take or achieve a functional skills between March the 20th and 31st of July. And they also must ensure that they meet all other requirements of EPA Gateway and are occupationally competent. So that means all training provider, apprentice and employer all agree that the apprentice is ready to take their EPA. So as I said, the Esf-8 have released some helpful information for employers, providers, EPAOs and apprentices on roles and responsibilities for EPA Gateway. I've added the link to this slide so you can refer to later on. Within this Gateway guidance, they've included the adaptations for the new flexibilities. So I've just pointed out a few of those that will be relevant to you as providers. So it is important that you make sure an apprentice is clear that they will not receive a certificate for their apprenticeship if they have passed their EPA until we have evidence as the EPAO that they have achieved a pass in their functional skills calculated grade. So we must have that evidence from providers that an apprentice has achieved their calculated grade in functional skills before we can process a certificate. They've also mentioned that you must keep the ILR completion status up to date, and that counts for before and after the functional skills calculated grade is achieved. So at point of when you receive your EPA results or the apprentice receives their EPA results, you must change the completer status. And then when you inform the EPAO that the functional skills calculated grade is achieved and we have claimed the certificate, you then again need to change the ILR completion status. So as the IMI, as the EPAO for you guys, we will be accepting bookings in line with the flexibilities as Esf-8 and IFA have set out. As I mentioned, we will process and send out overall results to all parties, so employer, apprentice and training provider once the EPA has been completed. As I touched on before, although we will be sending out the results, we will not be able to claim an apprentice certificate until we have proof or evidence from providers that an apprentice has achieved their functional skills as a pass. If an apprentice does fail their functional skills but passes an EPA, again, we cannot claim the apprentice certificate until we achieve that evidence that they have passed their functional skills. So all this information can be found on the Esf-8 website, also our COVID-19 support page. It's included in our FAQs. On this slide, I've included the links, so yeah, you can refer to them afterwards, and it's just useful for your information and to refer back to. So that's all for my updates today. I'll pass on to Tony for further EPA flexibility updates and the EPA booking schedule. Thank you.
Thanks, Nish. Thanks for that. Afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's well, and over the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes, I've just got a couple of slides I'll be running through with regard to EPA scheduling, latest updates, flexibilities, facilitation of EPA, and everything that we've been doing basically over the last 3 months and progressing forward with regard to assessment. So to start, current EPA booking schedule, Nishma has already touched on a lot of this with regard to our process and obviously with the SEPA updates. There is a set format for all of our EPA bookings or schedules, all of which there's fully documented support materials. I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you, will be aware of the IMI website and the IMI operating manual. You can find detailed guides for the booking process within the ops manual. It all falls under section 9 of the operating manual, and because, as I'm sure you're all very aware now, that there is nothing standard about any standards. They all have their tweaks and variations, so we thought it would be best within our ops manual to have separate sections for each apprenticeship standard, because goes into the specific detail for that standard. So within section 9, it's broken down into section 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, and so on, covering all 18 of the standards that we're currently approved for. So within that guidance, it'll go through the booking process, how to submit the booking. If you have any issues or queries, there's also contact details in there. So as part of the booking process, there is certain requirements that we have to follow. One of those currently is that you, as a training provider, employer, give the endpoint assessment organisation 90 days notice of EPA. Again, this isn't an IMI stipulation. This is actually an Esf-8 stipulation within their main provider guidance. And I was a little bored yesterday, so I read up on it again. And it is page, I believe, 31 and paragraph 155. So you can have a little bit of light reading yourselves if you want to follow that up. And it does specify 90 days. So make sure that when you're planning your EPA, you allow that 90 days notice. It won't be a case of completing any training or delivery and then expecting to do an EPA the following day or following week. There is that, that buffer period. When you do submit your EPA booking, obviously there will be requirements with regard to prerequisites. As part of our checks, within the 5 days of receiving the booking, we will check all the prerequisites for that specific standard and ensure that they're all in place, ready for us to progress down the EPA route. So, like I say, if you need any more information on that, you can find it all in section 9 of the Ops Manual. So moving on then to the Esf-8 Guidance. As I said, the guidance currently specifies a 90-day notification period. We have, as an endpoint assessment organisation, been in discussions over the last probably 3 to 4 months with some of our training providers that are finding some difficulties with giving notification or scheduling, planning the EPA in with their delivery, and when from the time that the apprentice completes their delivery or their training to actually conducting or going into EPA. Off the back of that, we've spent considerable time in discussions with the Esf-8, trying to highlight the concerns or the difficulties that some providers are having scheduling EPA. And as such, off the back of those discussions, we have now got agreement with the Esf-8 to review that process. We are coming towards the end of our proposal. We do have to get the final sign off by the Esf-8, but we do have a proposal in place, and we have been working at aligning all of our systems again to coincide with the proposals. So we are hopefully in a position that we'll be submitting to the Esf-8 our proposal probably in the next week, 10 days, and we are hopefully going off our discussions that we've had with the Esf-8, we hopefully will gain approval for a significant reduction in the 90-day notification. I can't obviously say right at this moment what that will be, because until we get it back and verified by the Esf-8, I can't promise or specify that that will definitely happen, but that will be submitted in the next week to 10 days. And all going well, by the end of July, beginning of August, we will be publishing the new process with hopefully a significant reduction in the buffer period, if you like, in between booking and actually running the EPA. Implementation of new bookings. Like I say, the actual process won't change with regard to the process. Nishma's already run through the booking and all the data within SEPA. So all of that is being updated as we speak, and that did start on Monday, as Nishma already covered. So the actual booking process won't change. There will be different timelines applied to the booking process of when we need specific things submitted, reviewed, confirmation of EPA, and then obviously going down through and into the actual EPA activities. The pre-booking schedule checks, I'd like to just touch on. What we've found, and I suppose it's a bit of best practice, with the increase in endpoint assessment and the activity increasing, although we did take a slight dip obviously over the last 3 months, although we have been very busy with EPA activity. What we have found is that a lot of the booking process, and this is to aid any hold-ups, I suppose, for the employer, the apprentice or the training provider, is the requirement to ensure that any mandated prerequisites that are specified in the specific assessment plan are actually reviewed prior to submitting your booking. We have had several instances where the booking has been submitted only to find several days later, as we go through our prerequisite checks, that there was inadequacies, I suppose, with the prerequisites. So whether there was no evidence for functional skills, for light vehicle, F-gas, for example, was missing, whether it's interviews or assignments, presentations, whatever the prerequisite might be, I would strongly advise any training provider prior to booking, actually check, review those prerequisites. I know that there's a lot of onus and emphasis that this is apprenticeship standards are employer driven, and yes, you'll probably find big variations across employers, that some will be more engaged than others. What we've seen is you can't rely on what the employer and apprentice have put into these logbooks with regard to prerequisites actually meets the assessment plan requirements. So just to save on any holdups, I would strongly advise that as a training provider, you do some form of check prior to booking your EPA bookings. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so flexibilities for EPA assessment. I'm sure many of you are aware of the flexibilities that have been published by the IMI, the IFA, TE, EQA providers for various standards. The flexibilities that have been applied, IMI have updated continually as the flexibilities have been published. If they've impacted on the assessment plans that the IMI are approved for assessment as an EPAO, we have a document on our IMI website, and it's on the website as IMI EPA update, and there is a link on this page, so you can just click on that afterwards when you get this sent out, and it will send you there. It lists all of the standards that the IMI are currently approved for. There's varying flexibilities dependent again on the standard, but one of the flexibilities, for example, customer service, the IFATE and the EQA providers have agreed that the workplace observations can be replaced for customer service with a witness testimony and a Q&A session with the independent assessor. So that's just one of the examples of that flexibility, and there are many in place. So again, please take the time just to have a look at the IMI EPA update, and indeed the IFATE link that I've got on this page. That will take you straight to the updates as well on the IFATE page. So they've been in place, or several of those flexibilities have been in place for some time now, several months. One of the things that we've been in discussion with the IFATE and the EQA providers is to highlight that some of these flexibilities actually make really good sense to maintain and keep even after the current situation, the lockdowns and everything else that we're having to abide by currently. There seems to be no reason why several of these flexibilities couldn't remain. It does make the EPA process slicker. We have got evidence that on some assessments that the flexibilities have actually improved assessment outcomes. One of our larger training providers that we work with the remote invigilation, I was in discussion earlier in the week, actually stated that their knowledge assessments have improved, whether that is down to they can take them in a more relaxed environment, although still fully invigilated and controlled. Perhaps it's an environment they're more comfortable with, and it was good to get some feedback from that training provider with those sort of positives. So the IF-8 have actually stated that they will review the flexibilities with the intention of maintaining some of these flexibilities if they deem to be, or if they're shown to be of benefit. So again, some good news there, I think, for everybody involved. EPA schedule. So again, this is linked to the flexibilities. Some of you who have gone through or continued EPA over the lockdown period will be aware of these, but those who haven't, it's just a bit of an update. And just as an example, I'll base this on light vehicle apprenticeship standard. So some of the flexibilities agreed for the light vehicle route. The assessment plan currently states that all EPA activity must start with the knowledge assessments. So assessment A, assessment B knowledge. Both assessments must be passed before the apprentice can progress any further in their EPA activity. So before they can progress on to the skills assessment. That, as part of the flexibilities, has been removed, that requirement. So it is not mandated currently, although it is in the assessment plan. There is no requirement currently for those apprentices to pass their knowledge test before they can progress onto any other activity within that endpoint assessment. The other big change, significant change, is that the order of assessments are no longer rigid. So again, looking at or referring to the light vehicle route, normally, as per assessment plan, the EPA would start with the 2 knowledge tests, the apprentice would pass them, then progress onto the skills assessment, complete the skills assessment, and then for APO3, within a week of completing the skills assessment, the professional discussion should have been completed as well. So there's a set order, and you can't progress on down those EPA activities until the knowledge has been passed. All of that has been lifted. So you could currently schedule an EPA booking or submit an EPA booking for light vehicle, starting with the professional discussion and then going on to the knowledge test and then on to the skills assessment. The choice is yours and what would best suit yourselves as a training provider, employer and apprentice. So if you're not aware of that, please take the time to look at the current flexibilities or get in touch and we can cover those specific criteria, because it does vary, obviously, again, depending on standard. But if you want more information, please have a look at our website or the IF-8 website, or indeed drop us a note or email and we'll get back to you on that. Assessment windows, next topic on there. Again, this is all part of the IF-8 updates during the last 3 months. As most of you, if not all of you, will be aware that the assessment windows, for dependent again on the standard, will have a specified timescale to complete all assessment activities within. That could vary anything, again, depending on standard, from a month to 6 months. What the IF-8 have stated is that there is a 12-week extension to all assessment windows. So if, again, I'll use light vehicle as the example, APO3 light vehicle specifies a 6-month assessment window. Normally, that would be the case. Current situation, it's 6 months plus an additional 12 weeks. So again, if you're having to juggle the scheduling, etc., for your EPAs because of the COVID-19 situation we find ourselves in at the moment, you have got that additional flexibility again there. So that should help a lot of providers, employers and apprentices out. Moving on to the skills observations. I think Mark touched on this briefly at the beginning, at the opening to this presentation. Skills activities, skills assessments, predominantly the technical ones, which we haven't had any flexibilities granted or approved. We are now actively out conducting skills assessments. So for your light vehicle, heavy vehicle, bus and coach, land-based engineering, any of the technical routes that require skills assessments in a workplace or a training provider's workshops. We are actually actively out conducting those as we speak. They're underway. We started at the beginning of the week and we are out conducting those assessments. So again, there are certain parameters we have to work to as per HSE guidance, the current government guidance, Public Health England. We, as an organisation, have got all of our requirements in place and all of our assessors have all the relevant COVID-19 PPE. And Barry, my colleague, will be covering the risk requirements and risk assessment requirements as a training provider a little bit later on. So if you want any more information on how to prepare for those skills observations, skills tasks, please again get in touch. That's no problem. We're more than happy to run through that with you. And finally, from myself, and again, Mark touched on this again, the IMI we have identified, we've been in discussion for some time with many training providers, but it has been amplified, I suppose, over the last 3 months, the requirements or the difficulties some training providers may find in facilitating endpoint assessment, again, specifically for the technical routes where workshop facilities are required to conduct the skills assessments. I'm happy to say that we have got multiple sites available now across England which are available currently. We have agreements in place to offer these facilities, and we will be publishing, again, this will be released very shortly with further details and locations of these assessment sites. But we have got them. So if you are finding any difficulties in scheduling EPA activities, skills assessments specifically, because of the conditions that we're finding ourselves in at the moment, please again get in touch. We currently have provision for light vehicle, heavy vehicle, and bus and coach. So if you have any requirement to conduct EPA skills assessments but are struggling to facilitate it yourself, please get in touch and we'd be more than happy to run that through with yourselves and what we have available. But like I say, we will be publishing this and making it all available on our website, and we'll be sending bulletins out shortly. That, I think, wraps my little session up. So thank you very much for your time. And I believe I'm now passing on to Barry.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all well and keeping yourself nice and safe. So as Tony alluded to there, my role here is to talk to you around risk assessments, and you'll see it's plastered there across the screen that we're going to talk risk assessments. Never the most exciting topic for a lot of people, but actually very, very, very important at the moment to keep ourselves safe, our customers safe, and our apprentices safe. So I've got a few things to talk to you about. So we're going to look at what we're doing with our team and what our risk assessment covers. Then we're going to look at a register. Then we're going to talk about your risk assessment, and then we're going to talk about how you get risk assessment to us. So if we then start with what we're doing. So obviously health and safety risk assessments is very important to keep your own staff and your own personnel safe and making sure that they have everything they need to go out and do the job to the best of their ability. So we have given all of our EPA consultants and assessors a PPE box, which covers everything from getting them from their house, so what we refer to as A, to your centre, which would be B. They have disposable masks, reusable masks, sanitizers, first aid kits, and latex gloves. So everything they would require from us to make sure that they can move safely to your centre, minimizing any infection rate and keeping themselves very, very safe. One of the really important parts for them is that the PPE they have is disposable, apart from the reusable masks, and this is for them to use during the journey to your centre. When they get to your centre, they will fall under your risk assessment, which we'll go through in a little bit of more detail later. So our risk assessment has looked at how we will interact with people, so the general public. So during car journeys, if they have to take public transport journeys, and what they'll do. So if they have to stop on the motorway, in motorway service stations, where they can wear their masks and their gloves, again to minimise the infection from people coughing or sneezing around them, or the touching of contaminated surfaces. So all of that PPE will be disposed of after being used, except for the reusable mask, which is washable. So they will have also signed a register for us, which sits with our risk assessment. And that register therefore says that they are happy with our risk assessment and are willing to work within the realms of it. This is a really important part for us, because it means that everybody that we have out on the road is covered by what we deem to be a sufficient risk assessment, and we do have a very comprehensive risk assessment for them. So all of our consultants that currently have booked assessments already have signed that register, and they have a box with the PPE in that they require. That box is transportable, so it will be moved from assessor to assessor as required, so that we didn't have to just spend loads of money on loads of PPE and it not get used. So we're making sure it goes to the people that need it at the point in time. So yeah, the register is really, really important for us to keep, so that we can satisfy HSE guidelines, and it also covers all of the government's required social distancing requirements within there. So yeah, so they will have signed our register. So when they get to B, so point B, which is your centre, they will then fall under your risk assessment. So your risk assessment, which I pretty much imagine you already have in place, that your health and safety officers have been around doing risk assessments. If they haven't been doing risk assessments, then feel free to get in touch with us, and we can give you a small amount of guidance on the certain aspects of things that we would require, and if required, some links to certain government websites or the HSE, so that you can look at what needs to go in to make your risk assessment as robust as you possibly can. Obviously, minimising the spread and maximising safety is the key to all of this. So there are some bits from the government which I'll just read out to you now, that you will need to encompass in your risk assessment, and it will require an awful lot more than that, but this will give you some pointer. So there are important actions that staff and apprentices who the IMI will work with can take during their COVID-19 outbreak to help prevent the spread of the virus. In all educational settings, preventing the spread of COVID-19 involves dealing with direct transmission, the instance with contact with people sneezing and coughing, and indirect transmission, which is through touching contaminated surfaces. A range of approaches and actions should be employed to do this. This can be seen as a hierarchy of controls that, when implemented, creates a hierarchy of safety risk assessment to prevent transmission of the infection, reducing any chance that any employee or any student apprentice has of gaining or contracting the virus. Minimizing contact with individuals who are unwell by ensuring those who have the corona or COVID-19 virus symptoms, or who have someone in their household who do not attend the centre. Cleaning hands more often than usual, washing hands thoroughly for 20 seconds. I'm sure I don't need to tell you how to wash your hands. Ensuring good respiratory hygiene by promoting the catch it, bin it, kill it approach, which we've probably seen from all flu and winter cold epidemics that have taken place, and cleaning frequently touched surfaces often. Also, thinking about break times, staggering these times to help with social distancing, so that you don't have large groups of apprentices, students or staff gathering in the same place. Class sizes or groups. Aim to practice social distancing in line with measures the government is asking everyone to adopt. So plan that EPA to take part in a safe way. Look at your workshop space and how social distancing can still be practiced. Bearing in mind that there will be requirements where apprentices will want to, at certain points, stop the assessment to ask a question of somebody, or to ask the technician to get them another tool or to hold something for them. We need to be really clear that social distancing needs to take place under government guidelines. So for us, it's really important that we have seen your risk assessment once you've written it, and that each assessor coming to you has agreed that they are willing to work underneath your risk assessment, which therefore means that you'll need them to sign your register to say that they have read, understood, and are willing to work under your risk assessment. So I hope that makes some sense to you. And please, if you have any questions about that, feel free to get in touch with us, and we would be more than happy to do what we can. Unfortunately, we can't write a risk assessment for you because everybody's workshop, everybody's facilities and their buildings are different. So you'll need to look at your own social distancing responsibilities, direction of flow, and how it would work in your workshop setting and with your equipment. Bearing in mind that there would be the requirement for sanitizing after each assessment has taken place. So sanitizing of tools, equipment, resources, insides of vehicles, making sure that any disposable seat covers or coverings have been thrown away. Any reusable coverings have been cleaned thoroughly, and making sure that each apprentice is issued with any new PPE that they require. So gloves, masks, each time they've removed them, so that they don't go around touching their faces from any of the contaminated areas. Once our assessor is on site with you, you will need to then provide them with gloves and with the disposable masks to make sure that they fit in with your risk assessment and anything else that you have deemed applicable within your risk assessment. We will make sure that they turn up with safety boots, overalls, dust jackets, work trousers, or polo shirts, depending on the requirement. But it falls to you to make sure that their PPE under your risk assessment is supplied by you. So how will you get your risk assessment to us? Getting your risk assessment is really easy. You can do it a couple of ways to get it to the right place. So we'd like to see it in Centres Hub, so that therefore not only do our endpoint assessors get to see it, but so do all of the EQAs or the business development team or anybody else that you've got coming out from the IMI, so that we can all work underneath the risk assessment that you have in place. You can email it in to the EPA team, and we will attempt to get it into the correct place for you as soon as we possibly can. And we'll then make sure that it goes to all of our assessors to look at, and the link that you will send, or however you would require us to sign your register at that point. So, like I say, if you have any questions about risk assessments, then please feel free to talk to us about those. Can I have the next slide, please, Lauren? Okay, so probably one of the best parts of the webinar, time to deliver the good news and what's been going on for us. So we're delighted to say that over the period of the lockdown, so since the middle or end of March, we've had 144 apprentices who have still interacted with us towards endpoint assessment, whether that's doing, as Tony alluded to, doing professional discussions or doing their online tests in a changed order. We've been able to facilitate online tests with remote invigilation, which has been a great success story for us, using Zoom technology to make sure that we can invigilate fairly. And also, like Tony said, there have been some really good results and really good feedback that the pass mark seems to have altered for the better for some apprentices, whether that's about being relaxed at home or whether it's about the fact that it's a one-to-one invigilation or just that they are on their own and not in a room with lots of other people. But whatever excuse is brought up for that being good, then that's just some really, really good news, and I'm really pleased for the apprentices that they've managed to achieve some of those online tests and accessing their professional discussions the same way they would have done normally. Excuse me, but doing it in a different order, which allows them to feel like they are continuing the journey towards the end of their endpoint assessment, only leaving the practical skills to do, which is great news. So we've used the format to deliver some endpoint assessments in full. So we've had some really good success within the motor finance route. We've had 10 apprentices go through the full endpoint assessment under the lockdown, all done through remote technology, and we are really pleased to say that they've received 9 double distinctions and 1 single distinction and a pass. So the results have been impeccable, and you can only tip your hat therefore to the training provider for the work and due diligence they put into continuing to prepare their apprentices for endpoint assessment, even in the lockdown situation, and to the point where some of those apprentices had been furloughed as well, so they weren't even able to go into a workplace, and it's all been done from home. So that's been great. Can I have the next slide, please, Lauren? What we've got here is just some quotes. So a quote from one of our training providers, Calibre, who most of the motor finance apprentices came from. So they were really pleased to see the forward thinking and an effective use of digital technology to continue the endpoint assessment journey. And also from our assessor who delivered the motor finance, she was really pleased to report that the actual use of technology was perfect to continue with endpoint assessment. So all in all, it's just been a bonus that we've been able to use this sort of technology to continue people's journeys. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Barry. And thanks everybody for all your input there. As I said at the beginning, a lot of information to go through. I'm sure some of you have took ample notes, but again, as I explained earlier, there's this video or the recording of the webinar will be available, and it will be sent out to all the people that are registered to attend the webinar, along with a copy of the presentation, which will have a number of links in it, as Nishma and Tony and Barry have already discussed. There are some links on the last couple of slides also. We've had a number of questions coming in. You all have been able to see some of those, and we've answered a number of those during the session, either in the content or we've answered them separately by messaging the individuals. And there are a couple of questions I'd just like to pick up with members of the panelists, if that's possible. So one of them, this is for Tony, so get ready, Tony, I'm going to ask you a question. And this particular question came from Jane, but I do believe that this is going to become a more common occurrence under the circumstances we find ourselves in. So Tony, Jane's asking or asking us a question around the fact that they've got a new member of staff joining the team. That member of staff is already an EPA assessor. Obviously they're new to that college, so they haven't taught or met even any of their students yet. And what Jane's asking is it possible for that individual to be involved in skills assessment at APO2 light vehicle?
Okay, thanks for the question, Jane. Quite a straightforward response, really. Yes, they can. However, there are some specific requirements. Obviously, that individual could be part of the EPA assessment alongside the independent assessor provided by the IMI. So they would act as an assessor recording the assessment, and then the assessment decision is made by the independent assessor that would be provided by the IMI. There is a caveat to that. You specify that the individual is already an EPA assessor. They would need to have gone through the accredited EPA assessor workshop and be certificated by the IMI. So again, they can do it, but there's those certain caveats that they can't have had any involvement with the apprentices, that they would be involved with the assessments. They must have completed and passed an IMI accredited assessor workshop, and then they can partake under the supervision of the independent assessor provided by the IMI. I hope that answers your question.
I think so, Tony. It certainly answered it for me. So Jane, hopefully Jane said yes, so that's excellent. Thank you for that. And as I said, I think that there may be some staff movements coming up over the summer period. So, you know, there could be a number of similar circumstances there. So happy to help Jane on that one. Got a question for Nishma. This came from John. And as I mentioned right at the beginning of the session, this industry, our sector, is full of abbreviations. And John was asking whether or not there'd be a list of abbreviations and what they mean. So Nishma, if you could pick this one up for us, please.
Yeah, of course. Hi, John. Thanks for your question. As Mark alluded, there are a lot of abbreviations in our industry, just in the educational system as well. So what we will do is we will update the FAQ page on our website and send out the links, or the links are already provided in this slide. So you'll be able to access that link directly through here. Yeah, so we'll just update the FAQ list on our website with all the abbreviations listed in this PowerPoint.
Thank you, Nishma. Appreciate that. And, you know, as Nishma said, we'll update our FAQ space on the website, but we'll make sure you've all got access to that. Got a couple more questions before we come to a close. We're doing okay on time with 2:56, so that's been really good. We've had a question from Roy, who's saying that they currently use Smart Assessor to support their student logbook and wondered whether SEPA works in conjunction with Smart Assessor portfolio system, particularly around logging of prerequisites, etc. Nish, I'm not going to ask you to answer this one again. I know you're working very closely with SEPA, but just for Roy's benefit and in case anyone else wasn't aware, Smart Assessor and SEPA are part of the same group. So they're systems that are provided by the same organisation ultimately. And we are working very closely with SEPA at the moment on how we can link various different logbook solutions in to pull the prerequisites in. So I think the short answer, Roy, is yes, there should be a connection, and we're working with that organisation to make sure we can make the journey far smoother in the future for everybody. So I hope that answered your question, Roy. Got one more which links to any organisation that, any training provider out there that delivers qualifications as well as endpoint assessment. So I know, looking through the attendee list, some of you have been on some of our previous webinars around regulatory framework from Ofqual, and one of the key elements in there, particularly to ensure that learners that were due to complete their qualifications, or indeed some apprenticeship frameworks during this current period, was enabling a number of adapted assessment types, one of which was remote invigilation. We've had a question from John, who's asked about remote invigilation. So John, knowing the details, I understand that as a training provider, you'll be doing some remote invigilation for qualifications where you've received confirmation and approval through the EQA. That can be carried on where you're delivering IMI gateways. So it can be used for IMI gateways as long as the EQA is fully aware of that. But for the EPA knowledge assessment, so for the knowledge assessments that happen at the end, we're currently conducting those through our own assessor team. So that's how that's being handled at the moment. I hope that helps, John. But if you've got any questions off the back of that, then please get in touch with us. That would be excellent. One last question then before we close for the session. Tony's positioned himself for this one. So Tony, we've had a question from Rick regarding some gateway questions, and I wonder if you could give Rick an update, please.
Yep. Hi, Rick. Thanks for your question. I can't actually remember when, I think it was the beginning of the year that we got together down at your college. But to answer your question, yes, the question banks, all EPA question banks since or during Christmas and the beginning of the new year up to March, I believe, or just prior to the lockdown, for heavy vehicle and bus and coach have been reviewed. I'm not directly involved in that, but I know the timescales. I think it was December through to the beginning of March, where we had, or we invited expert working groups in. So direct from industry, not just IMI writers, if you like. So they have been reviewed. they've all been signed off and they were all put forward and signed off from the industry. So as far as I'm aware, to answer your question, yes, they've all been updated. And John Harmon, the chair for the Boston Coach, was happy with the updates, and I've not had anything back since March when we finished that. So hopefully that's all fully up to date again. But that is an ongoing process, obviously, with all of our question banks. They are reviewed, and assessments. It is a mandated requirement for us as an EPAO to continue to review question banks and assessments. So that will be ongoing. But like I say, if there's anything you have concerns about, please get in touch. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Tony, and thank you everybody for participating. We've answered a number of questions, and I realise that unless you watch it back, you maybe find that challenging to remember everything. So we will update our EPA FAQ presence on the website with all of the questions that have been asked today, just so that everybody's got that information. We've got, as I mentioned earlier, got a couple of slides that just show some useful links. So some link into the IMI COVID hub, where we're putting all of our COVID related support information for all of our members and centres out there. Also a link to the government information, and linking to something that Tony spoke about earlier, the EPA flexibilities that are in place now and have been agreed. We have the next slide's got a couple of useful links around risk assessment. So from what Barry was talking you all through, I'm sure you're all really excited to create risk assessments, but it is a very, very important thing to do right now. We will support and give as much guidance as we possibly can. As Barry mentioned, every facility, every environment is going to be unique. So I guess it comes to a close with me just to thank Nishma, Barry and Tony. A lot of information over the last hour. I'm sure that the participants, the attendees that have joined us today have been grateful of that update. It shows that EPA is moving on. We're continuing to provide that service. We're here to help. If any of you have any questions at all, then please get in touch. As I mentioned earlier, this video and all the information will be sent directly to you all and put on our website. Stay safe, have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.